There's an old expression that I think most of us are familiar with. It goes something like, hey, sometimes less is more. It's a piece of advice that, when interpreted in a productive way, can help artists deliver poignant and intelligent pieces of work that respect a consumer's time. The fellas over at Frictional Games embodied it to revolutionize horror gaming all those years ago. The Coen brothers exercised it intelligently to craft captivating and ambiguous films. And Slint had it in mind when they created one of the most atmospheric albums to ever hit a dingy 1990s shelf. I have to bring your attention, however, to one man, presumably hailing from the less great White North, that has clearly never heard these words in his entire fucking life. Money Loves Silence tries to do a lot. You've got your shooting with some relatively unique combat mechanics given the genre. You've got environmental puzzle solving. You got this really interesting deck collection game that serves as a great vessel for a lot of cryptic world building. And last and certainly least, you've got first-person platforming, for God knows what reason. And the point of this video isn't to say that this is a masterpiece and you need to go buy it, because while I would offer it's an experience that's worth the $4 asking price, it'll almost certainly never be finished or even updated. And these are some rough fucking edges we're working with. I just want to commend it for showing some ingenuity within a genre that sorely lacks it. So let's start with some of the hiccups. Like with most early access and indie projects, movement is floaty, lighting isn't quite on point, and it's buggy. In the game's 2 to 2.5 hour runtime, I ran into a bug that forced me to reload a checkpoint 4 times. Conveyance can also be a problem, with some inconsistency in when and where the game will allow you to utilize certain mechanics to progress, potentially causing confusion. Lastly, there's this jarring disparity in storytelling quality between different segments. Like, some of the imagery you'll see is really captivating, and the background info you get from debtor files can really get you wondering. But then the nuance will just fucking evaporate, and you'll be literally shooting pictures of your past self to progress, or waiting in a locked elevator while the middle school principal gives you this egregious exposition dump. If you can work through that, however, I think this game functions as both a source of inspiration and a cautionary tale. The amount of things it tries to do, considering the obvious restraints, is more than commendable when you compare it to many horror projects from other developers, both indie and well-established. There's a ton of variety packed into these couple of hours. It's most reminiscent of Fear, if anyone remembers that one, with these text adventure memes that are kind of reminiscent of the intro to Firewatch. Plus that debt collection that I'm not sure how much I can compliment, because after 2 playthroughs, I'm still not sure how the shit works. Even if it's just essentially a set piece, it's still pretty interesting though. And the platforming is easily the scariest part of the game, for what that's worth. The number of distinct environments you'll be traversing is admirable too. The intro dream sequence is super cool and gets the imagination flowing. The seemingly derelict office you work in is just fucking dripping with atmosphere. And the church basement that transitions into an industrial graveyard and then into an edgy cult lair full of super soldiers is well designed. Now try comparing this to most other horror games of this scale. Yeah. Earlier, we mentioned Frictional Games. I love what they put out, and I own all of their games on one platform or another. I think they possess an acute understanding of how to excite a player's imagination, and their thoughtful storytelling, environmental puzzle solving, and creature design is enough to propel you through the mechanically light experience of their games. With that said, their influence has absolutely castrated the horror genre. Hundreds and hundreds of developers saw Amnesia and Soma and decided to just make one of those, but without the skill or effort needed to have the same impact. And I'm painting with pretty broad brushstrokes here, but I think anyone who's familiar with the horror games knows exactly what I mean. Most of them are kinda doo-doo. So the mere existence of an indie game like this, as infantile, unfinished, and unpolished as it is, it excites me a little bit. A shift in focus could do a lot of good for the horror genre. The appeal of mechanically light games to a developer is the obvious ease of programming compared to something more inspired by action horror like Resident Evil. This is where Money Loves Silence can tell developers what not to do. The game hasn't been updated since February of 2020, and the permanent 60% drop in price seems to signify that Vasily knows it's dead in the water. The undertaking of a project this massive was likely just unsustainable. And that sucks, but it happens to game studios and development teams all the time. All the games that come out and ask you to pick up pieces of paper in a creepy building and wait for the next jump scare until whatever the story is comes to a lazy conclusion, they might be unfortunate godless creations, but the one thing they do have on lock is their scope. They're not trying to be anything refreshing or interesting. They're trying to look good enough to sell and hope some big YouTuber happens to give them some fucking publicity. God, speak English, dude. God damn it. But tightening your scope and not utilizing resources on a million fucking mechanics isn't intrinsically lazy. It's economic intelligence, from the birth of development all the way through to strengthening consumer appeal long after release. While the developer's clear ambition to do something interesting with horror is what prompted me to make this video, I can't help but wish, in a weird way, that he had tried to do less. The deck collection sequences are so full of potential for tense gameplay and gripping world building, a la something like the administrative despair of games like Papers, Please. And if embraced to a greater extent, they could have allowed for these first-person shooter escapades and nightmare sequences to be greatly simplified from a design perspective while carrying greater weight in terms of story and horror. So I know that the subtext to this entire video has pretty much been horror games bad, but that's genuinely not how I feel at all. It's my favorite genre, and that's why I'm so critical of it. There are definitely developers out there doing good work and trying to evolve the genre, many of which have done a better job and had more success than Vasily. But I think this game in particular can teach us a lot. If you find this, Vasily, I hope you're not done with games, and I hope you can help save the horror genre from itself. Alright guys, that pretty much does it for this one. If you'd like to see some more coverage of obscure horror shit, or anything else for that matter, please go ahead and let me know. Subscribe if you're feeling like your genitalia is particularly massive, and I'll see you guys later.